Hi, so this is my instructor portion of my presentation about the copyright assignment. For the A portion, for Analyze Learners, I assumed that I would gather most of the details about the students from their classroom teacher. Looking at this from the point of view of a school librarian, I wouldn't be directly responsible for most of the differentiation that would go on with these students. I would be receiving that information from the classroom teacher as we planned the lesson, and I would request from her information about their age range, gender, and grade level, and then just based on my previous experiences as a classroom teacher, I would be aware about the difference levels and issues that could come with those student groups, like regular on-level students, gifted, special education, sheltered ESL, deaf or hard of hearing, students with a behavior plan, emotional disturbances, 504 accommodations across the spectrum, medical concerns, and other factors that I would need to incorporate into any lesson that I planned with them. For example, gifted students might need a more accelerated pace and less repetition and more challenging questions, while SPED students or even on-level students would benefit from a slower pace and simplified questions and maybe less questions, fewer questions. Their learning styles that I would address in this specific lesson, that there would be a visual and auditory component in the presentation, and then a physical and social component, and that they would be working in groups and moving around the room to different stations to accomplish the escape room activity that I would design to accompany the presentation. For their entry competencies, this teacher requested this lesson as part of a research portion of her class. So I would probably request or expect that they would previously be learning with her about the actual mechanics of the research itself, and maybe we would have done a previous library lesson on that, and that because they are digital natives, as mentioned in the assignment, that they are familiar with using the internet to find those sources for research. For the S portion, state standards and objectives, I found in my research that there are standards in the state of Texas across all levels of middle school that address copyright law. For example, in 8th grade specifically, in the technology applications portion of the TEKS, it's TEKS number 126.16C5A, the student is expected to understand, explain, and practice copyright principles, including current laws, fair use guidelines, Creative Commons, open source, and public domain. There's also a TEKS in the English portion that requires that 8th grade students display academic citations and use source materials ethically. So I think that this lesson could address both of those TEKS. Those could both be possible TEKS that we could use as standards to be addressed. The objective for the lesson would be that students should be able to identify and demonstrate their knowledge of copyright rules, which was part of the lesson requested by the teacher. The second S, select methods, media, and materials. The students would be viewing the presentation via the projector on a screen. It would be presented from a Prezi on my laptop. Because this lesson and the activity would be either designed by me or it would be an existing resource modified by me, I would design those ensuring that they would be free of bias and aligned to these standards, that it would be accurate and age appropriate for this grade level, and I would also include thorough directions for that. Following this lesson, students would be working in self-selected groups of 2 to 3 students to solve a digital escape room. And the clues would be solved based on utilizing the knowledge that I presented in the copyright and fair use lesson. For you, utilize resources. For for the preview portion, I would be previewing and practicing the resources as I create them, which would ensure that I would be prepared to supply and effectively use that technology and the media that's required. For preparation, I would make sure that the laptop with the Prezi is set up, the presentation is ready to go, projector is ready to go, turned on, queued up. Before I would begin, I would make sure and communicate with the students and let them know what is expected and what they'll be doing with the information after it is presented. Then I would actively present and monitor, or present the lesson and then monitor their engagement throughout, pausing to check for understanding, answer any questions that they had as I went along. For required learner participation, students are required to actively listen to the presentation. They must be paying attention, eyes on me, actively listening as I present. And then participation in that digital escape room as part of that group is also required. Their grade for the activity will be based both on the correct completion of that activity, but also on their participation as observed by both myself and the classroom teacher. For the E, evaluate and revise, I would evaluate the success of this lesson based on the student's completion of the digital escape room activity. If I noticed that they were having difficulty with certain questions, if certain clues weren't clear, that might be something that I would go back and revise later. If it was too easy, if they finished too quickly, for example, if there was a pre-AP class and they seemed to move through it too quickly, I might revise that and make those questions a little bit more rigorous or add more steps to them in order to enrich that process to where they're getting what they need out of it. I would also ensure that students who had special language needs or special like behavioral and social interaction needs, that they were able to complete the activity and get what was needed out of it as well. That probably comes more under the differentiation section of this, but that is something that I would be observing as the lessons were going so that I could go back and make revisions if there were unforeseen issues that came up as part of actually participating in the activity. So I think that's everything.